gram positive or gram. So whether you are dealing with gram positive or gram negative organisms, and you can give the antibiotics accordingly. And also in R, where dengue and malaria is endemic, a simple peripheral blood film can also give you an idea about the source of infection. So blood cultures should be sent, but if you are working in a resource constrained setting where blood cultures are not present, are not done in your hospital, then it should not delay. Like if you are asking the patient's family to bring you the culture bottles from an outside laboratory, it's going to delay giving antibiotics to more than an hour, and that should not be done. But if you are practicing in a hospital where blood culture can be sent immediately, then do send the blood cultures before starting antibiotics. But also keep in mind that if possible, send for gram staining and the peripheral blood films. Now, it is recommended to give antibiotics as soon as possible within 1 hour of diagnosing sepsis. And why do we do that? Because studies have shown that each hour of delay in antibiotic administration is associated with about 7.6% decrease in survival of septic shock. And is giving antibiotics feasible? Even in Pakistan, low resource, every kind of hospital, we have IV antibiotics. So it is definitely feasible. But the question is that which antibiotic to give, because you have to find or have some idea about the source of infection, because then you will have an idea about the most likely organism, what is the resistance pattern, especially in your own hospital, and the availability and cost of antibiotics have to be kept in mind, and not forgetting that the source of infection may not be a bacteria, and it could be a viral, parasitic, or a fungal infection. So these have to be kept in mind. And for all hospitals, it is important to develop locally relevant guidelines on the initial antimicrobial coverage in patients with sepsis. As Sohaib had said, that with Dr. Fazal Hamid and myself, we adapted. We did not develop, we just adapted the Surviving Sepsis Campaign guidelines to our local setting. And these were published in 2015. They are quite old, but I think if you go through them, it is very good. The IDSP, the MMIDSP Society of Pakistan had given very good recommendations of what to do before giving the antibiotics, after giving the antibiotics, what are the most likely pathogens of the most likely source of infection in our setting, and what is their likely sensitivity and resistance pattern. So it is important that we don't only look at the Western literature, but we look at our own literature. And then it is more important that the hospitals should develop their own guideline based on our local flora. So the recent update regarding the antibiotic is only about the whether the patient is in sepsis or in shock. So, and if the sepsis is definite or probable, or sepsis is possible, because previously the guidelines said that, if you're suspecting sepsis, just give antibiotics within 1 hour. But there's also a strong criticism that this is spreading, because the use of broad spectrum antibiotics is spreading resistance. So we should be careful. So they have now just done this, that if you are not sure and sepsis is only a possibility, then you rapidly evaluate, do investigations to find the source of infection. And if you don't find it, and there could be other reasons for whatever hemodynamic or other organ system failure you are suspecting, then you can delay giving antibiotics by 3 hours. But again, 3 hours, you should be in a position to say whether infection is suspected or not. Then fluid resuscitation, the recommendation is to give 30 mils of a crystalloid within half an hour of diagnosing sepsis. And the aim is to maintain a mean arterial pressure of 65. And the emphasis is to use crystalloids. Balanced crystalloids are ringer lactate, and albumin can also be used. And the recommendation is not to use the hydroxyethyl starches. And we give fluid because tissue perfusion in sepsis is partly impaired by hypovolemia, and patients may have substantial fluid deficit requiring even 6 to 10 liters within the first 24 hours to restore the intravascular volume and organ perfusion, especially in patients with abdominal sepsis. And effective and timely fluid resuscitation is associated with decreased early mortality. So this whole issue of fluid resuscitation goes back many years to 2001, when the RIVER trial was published, that gave a scheme of how to maintain CVP map, central venous oxygen saturation. And if you achieve the goals of all these parameters, the outcome seemed to be better. But since RIVER trials, 3 other trials have been done, which are ARISE, PROCESS, and PROMISE. And all these trials have shown that protocolized fluid resuscitation may not improve outcome. Now, I'm not going into detail of these trials. I've just mentioned the name so that because for like anesthetist only, it is not very important to know them. But if you are working in ICU, you can go through the literature and figure out what's the difference between the initial reverse trial that was done, that started this aggressive fluid resuscitation, and what was done following the reverse trial. So in the latest update, which is 2021 guidelines, they have just modified the fluid resuscitation, keeping in mind 3 types of patients. So if the patient has pneumonia or is hypoxic, they have congestive heart failure, or they have end-stage renal disease. So these are the 3 groups of patients in which you have to give fluid resuscitation, but you have to be extra careful. And what does being extra careful mean? So being extra careful means that you have to keep reassessing them with their blood pressure, heart rate, urine output. And even if you have like ultrasound available, or CVP can be used, and especially central venous oxygen saturation monitoring can be done. Then they also recommend to use dynamic indicators of fluid responsiveness like pulse pressure variation. And if you have lactate available, do repeated lactates and to assess the lactate clearance. So basically, what they are trying to show is that fluid resuscitation is very important, especially if the patient has no history of pneumonia or renal disease or heart disease. You can give 30 ml per kg, and then if the patient doesn't respond, start vasopressors. But if the patient has any of these conditions, then you have to go a little bit slow, and then a lot of attention should be given to invasive monitoring and dynamic parameters of fluid responsiveness, and just being extra careful. And for vasopressors, obviously the first choice is always norepinephrine, and the target is a MAP of 65. So there is no contention up till now about these 2 things. But sometimes if central venous line is not available, a more diluted version of vasopressors can be given peripherally. And if you are in a hospital setting where CVP is available, and if the pressure is very low, you're starting vasopressor, it's a good idea to have an arterial line as well. And if the patient is not responding to fluid resuscitation and noradrenaline, then vasopressin is the next vasopressor of choice. And if there is cardiac dysfunction, obviously then you need to maybe use dobutamine or switch to epinephrine. So all these things are in the latest guidelines when it comes to fluid resuscitation. Now, the latest guideline, I have just given you an overview of the things that are mentioned in the first R of management of sepsis, which is so that you have some idea why we do this, and if we don't have it, is there an alternative available, and what are the situations in which fluid resuscitation and vasopressor use should be done carefully. Now, the 2021 guidelines, they actually have 93 statements, and I think it will take me an hour or two to go through all those statements. But I have just selected a few of them to highlight the importance of things that we normally or commonly in ICU standing, we don't do, or we are either confused about it, or we do it wrong. So the most important recommendation that I find in these recent updates is the recommendation of using performance improvement programs for sepsis. So especially in teaching hospitals, all the bigger hospitals of Pakistan and even abroad, so they should have, and this is actually the only strong recommendation. So if you go through all the recommendations, most of them are weak recommendation and based on low quality evidence. But the only, like one of the very few strong recommendations is to use performance improvement programs. So people who are in a position, in an administrative position, they should emphasize on this so that they can assess the compliance to the 1 hour bundle and what is going on in their center. And then the other thing is that once the patient is in septic shock and is hypotensive, and we are using vasopressors and giving fluids, you should not limit yourself to only heart rate, blood pressure, CVP, urine output, and altered mentation. But you should also make an effort to use the dynamic parameters of fluid responsiveness that include response to either passive leg raise or a fluid bolus of 200 mL. And you can assess the response either using stroke volume or stroke volume variation or pulse pressure variation or echocardiography, whatever is available to you. I think pulse pressure variation is the simplest to assess because you need a Swan-Ganz catheter for the stroke volume assessment. And echocardiography, if expertise is available, it's a good thing to have. So do try to use the dynamic parameters if the patient is in shock and you are resuscitating the patient. And capillary refill is a very simple technique, does not need any extra gadget. It just need maybe a little bit of training. So if the patient is in shock, you can use capillary refill time to guide resuscitation. The best is to use Lactate if you have available and the patient can afford. But if you don't, then capillary refill time, the recent guidelines have shown that it is a feasible option to use to guide resuscitation. And then if the patient is in shock, the best place is in ICU. Again, it is easier said than done because availability of ICU beds may not be there. So sometimes the patient are in ICU for a long time. So if you are going and seeing the patient in ER, you can recommend that the patient should be in ICU and closely monitored, especially with invasive monitoring. Then the other thing is procalcitonin. So procalcitonin is again not available everywhere. It's an expensive test, and the diagnosis of sepsis does not rest on CRP and procalcitonin values. Procalcitonin is basically useful once you are when you want to stop the antibiotics. So it is good to have the baseline, and then if the procal level are going down, you can de-escalate your antibiotic therapy. And when we are talking about fluids, the guidelines, the earlier guidelines suggested to avoid starches. So starches are not available in Pakistan, so that was not an issue for us. But now these guidelines have shown that even gelatins should not be used for fluid resuscitation. So gelatins include Hemaxel and Gelofundin, Gelofusin. So if you want to use colloids during resuscitation of a sepsis patient, initially, obviously, it's a crystalloid, but then albumin can be used to resuscitate the patient, especially if you want to use lesser volume because you are worried about the congestive cardiac failure patients. So then to reduce the volume, you can use albumin. And vasopressin use, again, vasopressin is a medicine which is not available in all ICUs, but if it is available to you, so you should use it earlier rather than later. So you start with norepinephrine, but if you're not getting the required response, even after fluid resuscitation, the next vasopressor to add is vasopressin. And invasive monitoring, I've seen many times that the patient is on 2 vasopressors, but arterial line is not used. Mostly it is because of resource constraint or financial constraint. But if the facility is available and the patient can avoid, and the patient is in shock and getting fluid and resuscitation and vasopressors, do put an arterial line in, because it really makes life very easy. Now, there are few recommendations regarding the management of hypoxia, or if the patient is in sepsis or septic shock and is hypoxic. So they have suggested to use high flow nasal oxygen over non-invasive ventilation. So this is a recommendation, a new recommendation. And maybe I don't know the follow-up, maybe they will change, but right now the recommendation is to use HFNC rather than BiPAP or CPAP. Again, it depends upon the availability. And if you are putting the patient on the ventilator, most people who are handling patients on the ventilator know that they have a choice either to use low PEEP, high FiO2, or high PEEP, low FiO2 algorithm. So these guidelines suggest to use the higher PEEP over lower PEEP when they are dealing with a hypoxic patient on ventilator. And recruitment maneuvers should be used for adults with sepsis-induced moderate or severe ARDS. Then sometimes physicians are very inclined to use intravenous immunoglobulins. So these guidelines suggest not to use intravenous immunoglobulins. But when it comes to corticosteroids, the recommendations are still to use corticosteroids, especially if the patient is in septic shock and is on 1 vasopressor and is going on the 2nd vasopressor. Exact time when to use corticosteroids, again, is a little bit subjective, and it depends upon what you are used to doing. What I usually do is that if the patient is not responding to fluid resuscitation, you quickly add norepinephrine and then monitor the patient. And very quickly, if the dose is escalating and it looks like the patient is going on the 2nd vasopressor, that's the time to start corticosteroids. And the dose is 200 milligrams divided 6 hourly. So it's 50 milligram intravenous hydrocortisone given 6 hourly till resolution of the septic shock. Transfusion, again, if in surgical ICU, mostly the surgeons are very happy with the hemoglobin more than 10 and they want to use blood. But these are recommendations to use conservative rather than restrictive rather than liberal hemoglobin therapy. So which means that you should not aim for a hemoglobin of 10 grams over unless the patient has any history of ischemic heart disease. Then obviously hemoglobin of 10 and above is fine. But otherwise, in patients without any history of ischemic heart disease, hemoglobin of 7 to 8 grams per deciliter is fine. Then all the patients in ICU, they usually do get DVT prophylaxis, and these guidelines recommend using low molecular weight heparin over unfractionated heparin. I'm sure there is no issue about availability of low molecular weight heparins. Then a patient in septic shock and generally in ICU, sugars have to be maintained, glycemia. Glycemic control is very important, but the current guidelines recommend that for adults with sepsis or septic shock, insulin therapy should be started at a glucose level of more than or equal to 180 milligrams per deciliter. So this is a strong recommendation as well, because previous guidelines showed a much lower target of 140 to 150 milligrams per deciliter. So I think more episodes of hypoglycemia increase the morbidity and mortality. So therefore, now the current guidelines for glycemic control is 180 milligrams. So insulin should not be started before that. Then another thing is that it is, again, a recommendation is that once the patient has recovered, the family and the patient, they should be educated about the post-ICU care of the patient, because there is a high incidence of post-ICU sepsis syndrome. So they should be rehabilitated and educated before they leave. And follow-up of the patients is very important, because in our country, we know once the patient is discharged from ICU, we never get to see them. There is no follow-up of the patients at all. And the guidelines recommend that these patients should be followed up. And if you want to read this is the latest paper that very nicely updates the sepsis and septic shock in adult patients management, especially in the emergency department. Otherwise, the guidelines, the latest guidelines are 2021, and there is no update. And I'm very happy to share that I'm in the panel of Surviving Sepsis campaign that will be revising the next Surviving Sepsis campaign guidelines. So that will come up in 2026, I think. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. But I also want to let you know that all government ICUs in Sindh are now on a registry, and this dashboard is freely available. If you want to copy this link, you can see whatever is going on in the government ICUs of Sindh, what is the case mix, and what kind of organ support they are needing. And hopefully we will be able to figure out the sepsis incidence in our ICUs, especially in Sindh, because all government ICUs are on this registry. Okay, thank you. Any questions? I am happy to answer.
Thank you, Dr. Madhia, for a wonderful talk, from starting from 1992 and then coming till 2023. Any questions, you can just write in the chat box as well. I think so. There's no question coming on. So,
Assalamualaikum. Sir, I have a question regarding the bundle. फर्स्ट बंडल तो 1 आवर का होता है यूजली, उसके बाद एक इसमें क्राइटेरिया था कि 20 आवर्स का बंडल होता है, क्योंकि फर्दर जो फ्लोड मैनेजमेंट हम देख रहे हैं उसकी असेसमेंट हम कैसे करेंगे? वो बंडल का हिस्सा है कि वो तो 1 आवर के बाद ही हम कर रहे हैं
नहीं, वो तो फिर
एंटीबायोटिक?
आपके पेशेंट, एक्चुअली 1 आवर बंडल का सिर्फ मकसद ये है कि वंस यू हैव डायग्नोज दैट द पेशेंट इज इन सेप्सिस, इट्स अ मेडिकल इमरजेंसी, so then you cannot leave the patient till you have done those 5 things. But that doesn't mean that the patient is going to get cured. Uske baad it's the ICU management that goes on and on till the patient is out of septic shock. And while during the first 24 hours, many issues come up, ventilation hai, then how to de-escalate the antibiotics, how to find the source of infection, fluid resuscitation continue kaise karni hai, kitna dena hai. So all those things, if you go in detail on the Surviving Sepsis Campaign guidelines and you read those guidelines, you will find answers to all your questions. I have not gone through all of them. I just highlighted the common ones that are usually we come across. But these guidelines are again basically just guidelines, and these are not management of a total septic shock patient. So this is how
Okay,
to
ma'am.
recognize sepsis and get started.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right,
One
thank you.
question is that what is your opinion on continuous or extended infusions for antibiotics in sepsis, especially in context of latest Blink-3 trial?
Bilkul, so the latest trial shows that it was presented at one of the conference that continuous infusions are better.
Okay.
लेकिन again हमें
Uh,
अपने scenario में देखना है because we have constraints. Not everybody has infusion pumps, so it is in resourceful जगहों पे if you have the availability of pumps, then obviously go for continuous infusions.
okay. One question is, ma'am, that what is the maximum dose of noradrenaline?
Noradrenaline, again, maximum dose कहीं लिखी ही नहीं है, but 2 mics per kg per minute. Usually, when you are hitting that, you know कि अब इसका फायदा नहीं होगा इससे ज़्यादा, and you then switch to the second vasopressin. What do you
One
do,
question is,
Shoaib? You are an intensivist as well. मैं तो 2
yeah,
से ऊपर कभी नहीं गई, कोई फायदा नहीं नजर आया 2
once
से
we
ऊपर जाने.
yes, once we go above like 2 mics, then we start seeing the side effects of these vasopressors as well. So,
But make sure
side with
that it is, make sure that your infusion pump gives you the mics per kg per minute. Because if you're using infusion pumps, obviously wo jo burettes hain, usme the dose is different. So we are talking about when you're using infusion pumps with mics per kg per minute. Then you say that going above 2 mics per kg per minute usually is not beneficial.
one question is, ma'am, that I am working in government ICU as albumin is very costly, not available. So still, can we use gelatins?
I think if albumin is not available, you better stick to crystalloids only, because gelatins will not benefit and harm the patient. Uski kidneys ko bahut asar hoga, wo jayegi. So I would suggest that you obviously, agar if the patient is going into fluid overload, you will have to intubate and ventilate the patient. So that is one thing. Resuscitating patients, unintubated patients with large volume obviously is always a risk, but you have to take that risk when you are resuscitating a patient with fluid, because otherwise the septic shock will keep worsening. So if you have to ventilate the patient, no harm. If you have to do it, you have to do it. But I would not use gelatins at all in septic shock, and I would rather, if albumin is expensive, I would just use crystalloids.
Okay, ma'am. One question is that is there any update on the timing of initiation of antibiotics in burns patient coming with sepsis?
No, there are no special recommendations. Recommendations are only if you are not sure that the patient has sepsis and the patient is not in septic shock. If you are not sure about sepsis, but the patient is in shock, then you have to give antibiotics. And in burn, again, you have to burn. The problem is that diagnosing infection in burn. So it is not about antibiotic recommendation. The issue is that in burn patients, can you say that the patient is in septic shock, or is it just a response to burns? Because all the SIRS criteria, tachycardia, and increased white cell count, all of these are signs of burn itself. So if the patient has burns and it is not septic shock, then obviously you shouldn't go for antibiotics. So that is one condition which confuses you, that it has signs of sepsis, but if you are not, so it's the surgeon who has to assess the burn wound and make the final decision that is this wound actually causing, is the source of infection. If the burn wound is the source of infection, then it's septic shock, then you have to follow the sepsis guidelines. Dr. Fazal is asking me a question.
Yes.
I'm terrified. Ji, Dr. Fazal.
Refer.
No, I am not asking
question, Dr. Vadia. Thank you very much for a very, very, elaborative talk as usual, and I really enjoyed it. I'm just suggesting one thing, like most of the people in Pakistan are worried about assessing the fluid responsiveness in these patients because we don't know actually. And so the simple thing that I have been doing when I was actually practicing ICU was to just do the systolic pressure variation, which can easily be done with the help of an arterial line. And through that we can easily do this and then assess the fluid responsiveness. The formula is very simple. Everybody knows, I think, here. And if it's more than 13%. So again, if we do not have the facility of, very sophisticated, say, measurements of stroke volume and things like that. So this is one thing that we can do here as well. Secondly, I would request you, when you will review these guidelines in 2027, that is an honor for Pakistan. I believe still that, the guidelines about 30 mils per kg will ultimately go because of mostly the studies that are coming, and initially the study that was proposed by the reverse trial was such that it is still a doubt that what they were saying. So I request you to go there, study about these fluids, and maybe I believe because the fluid 30 mils per hour is going to go in the in those guidelines for sure.
Yeah,
Thank you,
30
Dr.
ml
Vadia.
per hour, actually, it is only to get you
Per kg,
started. So
per kg.
it's not like that you
Yeah.
don't have to keep going in. So in the previous guideline, they have taken into account that if the patient has any cardiac condition or severe pneumonia at risk of fluid overload, or the renal patient. So these are complex patients. Then there is no one answer how it is then the experience of the intensivist that comes in. So nobody can recommend what to do in a patient who is at risk of hypoxic ventilatory failure or ARDS. So recommendations, I think, can never cover these conditions. So in these conditions, then the experience comes in using the dynamic parameters, as you suggested, that we don't have a PA catheter, so we can't measure stroke volume, but simple leg raising and the response either in the form of pulse pressure variation, which now anybody who has an arterial line, the pulse pressure variation, you can even visually eyeball and see if there is pulse pressure variation or not, or if there is systolic pressure variation, as you have suggested. I think arterial line is not a very expensive gadget. If you are resuscitating patients, if you have an arterial line, it gives you a lot of information, and then you can use this response to a fluid bolus, either using the passive leg or actual fluid bolus of 200 ml, and see what is the response in terms of the pulse pressure variation, which you only need an arterial line to have that.
Okay, ma'am. The last question, you have already explained that the fluid resuscitation in cardiac patient with fluid overload with sepsis. So I
Yeah,
think so
these are
that's
complex conditions. There is no one answer, no that can fit every. These patients are very difficult to resuscitate. So the only recommendation is that the more invasive monitoring you can do, like an arterial line or a CVP line or central venous oxygen saturation or lactate. So you have to then have as many, if you have more information available, you will be better able to use it. So that's the only thing I can recommend, that do go for central venous oxygen saturation. The target is to maintain is above 70%, and then have some kind of dynamic parameter like response to a fluid bolus or response to passive leg raising, looking at their pressure or pulse pressure variation. So invasive monitoring is now, I think, in teaching hospital at least, it should not be a novelty. An A line, a CVP line, if you are resuscitating a septic patient. And when it comes to antibiotics, do be aware of what bugs are present in your hospital setting, what is the sensitivity pattern, and you just can't say then meropenem and vancomycin to all patients. You have to have some idea about the source of infection, the most likely organism, at that site, and then the most likely antibiotic that can be used in your scenario. So that is more important than any other thing. That get antibiogram from your hospital ID department, and be aware what are the bugs that are most likely for which source of infection.
Dr. Madhya, Dr. Saida Haider is online as well with us.
Oh,
Dr. Saida,
wow. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saida.
Dr. Saida,
Thank you
can you
for
have some
joining.
comments on the presentation as well?
Lovely presentation, Madiha. Excellent. Absolutely
I am
superb. I always
honored.
enjoy your
I am
presentation.
so honored. I'm really honored to have Dr. Fazal
Oh,
and
no,
you.
thank you. Lovely, lovely. Absolutely lovely. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Ashad Taki have also joined us, and he put a question like in the last, I think this is the last question, then we will be concluding our session, that what is the
You
role of
should
point?
have warned me beforehand. You've never told me that all such senior people are also going to join. I would have changed my presentation a little bit.
Here's a question that
It
what is
was
the role of what is the role of point of care ultrasound in these kind of patients?
देखिए जी, जितनी भी एक्सपर्टीज आपके पास है उतना ही बेहतर आप फिजिशियन है और उतना ही बेहतर आप, बिकॉज पॉइंट ऑफ केयर अल्ट्रासाउंड स्पेशली इफ द पेशेंट जो ये 3 तरह के पेशेंट्स हैं, रीनल एंड स्टेज रीनल डिजीज है, कंजेस्टिव कार्डियक फेलियर है और या निमोनिया का पेशेंट है, उसमें इफ यू हैव द एक्सपर्टीज ऑफ डूइंग point of care echo, it is it's an excellent skill to have. So all new budding intensivists should have that skill, because you can then figure out कि fluid कहाँ जा रहा है और कहाँ नहीं जा रहा, and plus the आपके जो dynamic variables हैं, आपकी IVC measurement. So जितने ज़्यादा आपके पास assessment के tools होंगे, चाहे वो point of care ultrasound है, चाहे वो invasive monitoring है, the more tools you have and the more information you have, you will be better able to manage the patient. अगर कुछ भी नहीं है, सिर्फ मरीज है, blood pressure है, NIV है और यूरिन आउटपुट और मेंटेशन है, ऑब्वियसली देन यू आर लिमिटेड, देन यू आर ब्लाइंडली प्लेइंग. यू नो कि फ्लूइड देना है, लेकिन इफ द पेशेंट इज हाई रिस्क पेशेंट, वो फ्लूइड कहाँ चला जाए, उसको कैसे मैनेज करना है, things become very difficult. But the minimum is to monitor the blood pressure, heart rate, urine output and mentation. Then usse upar hai कि you can give a fluid bolus or passive leg raise and assess the response through either systolic blood pressure variation or pulse pressure variation. उससे ऊपर है कि आपके पास अल्ट्रासाउंड है, और फिर अल्टीमेट तो है कि अगर आपके पास कोई पीए कैथेटर टाइप की चीज है, या कोई आपके पास नीको पीको है, या कोई आपके पास कार्डियक आउटपुट मॉनिटरिंग डिवाइस है, तो वो फिर बिल्कुल हाई एंड पे है. तो डिपेंडिंग ऑन वेयर यू आर, बट बेसिक अंडरस्टैंडिंग ज़रूरी है कि सेप्सिस में क्या हो रहा है. इट इज़ अ लीकीनेस, इट इज़ हाइपोवोलेमिया, जिसकी वजह से हाइपोटेंशन और ऑर्गन परफ्यूजन जो है वो कॉम्प्रोमाइज हो रही है, और आपने मैनेज करने के टूल्स, आपके पास एंटीबायोटिक्स हैं और आपके पास फ्लूइड है और आपके पास वेजोप्रेसर है. अब इन 3 थेरेपीज का इंटरेक्शन है, किसको कैसे करना है, कब करना है, कितना करना है, that comes with experience. And the little nuances that are like 93 recommendations के blood sugar क्या होनी चाहिए, PEEP होनी चाहिए, so all those things are written in the guidelines, which जहाँ आप फंसे, so refer to the guidelines. They have literally given a recommendation for everything. DVT prophylaxis क्या होना चाहिए, vent settings क्या होना चाहिए, ट्रांसफ्यूजन स्ट्रैटेजी क्या होनी चाहिए, वेंटिलेटरी स्ट्रैटेजी क्या होनी चाहिए, ब्लड शुगर कितना होना चाहिए. सो ऑल दोज थिंग्स आर इन द गाइडलाइंस.
Thank you, Dr. Madhya, for a wonderful talk and finishing in time as well. All the participants should fill the feedback form to get the certificate. The feedback form link is in the chat box as well. Once again, thank you, Dr. Madhya, for the sepsis updates and guiding us all through that recent updates. I think so. You will be changing the definition again in 2026 for sepsis.
I hope
Again.
so, because this definition is so vague, it doesn't help. My contention always is it starts with the physician. So what if the physician is not suspecting infection? Then you cannot move forward. So it's the physician who has to be very, very aware and alert about the patient's history, examination, clinical signs, because unless the clinician suspects infection, you cannot move forward that whether it is sepsis or septic shock. And then obviously you will not do the 1 hour bundle and the whole management goes back.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Madhya, once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'm sorry if like there are any participants who do not understand Urdu, because I was kind of forced to speak Urdu at the
Thank you
end
so much.
of it. Okay, ji.
Thank you so much.
Khuda Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.